So, for the audience, first of all, I would like to welcome you for this webinar, and we will be starting in 3 minutes, as the time to start is 2 p.m. India time. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So before starting, let me introduce our participants, the speakers. First is Dr. Richa. She is the organizing secretary of the CME, and she is the head of Department of Forensic Medicine, Sarojini Naidu Medical College, Agra. And our second speaker is Giuseppina Sapini, Dr. Giuseppina Sapini. She is a criminologist and forensic analyst. So we are delighted that she will be presenting a very good presentation today. She is the director for Piedmont Office Forum Lex Association, and she is also the vice president for Forum Lex Association, Lini, Piedmont, Italy. Our third participant is Dr. Pragnesh Parmar. He is additional professor and head of department, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, BB Nagar, India. And he is also life member of Indian Academy of Forensic Medicine, IST, IMPAFO, and very many other PAFMAT, many associations. He is also the vice president of the South Zone Indian Academy of Forensic Medicine and honorary vice president of GLAFIMS Association. And last, myself, I am Dr. Imran Sabri, also moderating this session. So I am working as head of the Department for Division of Forensic Medicine, Department of Biomedical Sciences, College of Medicine, King Faisal University, Al Ahsa. So this is the short participation, and we have one more presenter, Dr. Peter Kralt. He will be presenting on a virtual autopsy, some introduction to the virtual autopsy. So I think it's 2 p.m. Dr. Giuseppina, do you want you will share your slide from your end, or we will share from here?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. I'm going to share.
Let me assign you as presenter.
My presentation. Well,
yeah, yes. Now you can share the presentation. So we will be starting with the presentation from Dr. Giuseppina Sapini from Italy, and she is presenting on criminology of child abuse.
okay.
So take your time, don't worry. You can share. You want me to share?
You see my presentation? You see my presentation?
No, just give me a chance.
Okay. Can you see it?
So now I think.
I try again.
Yes,
Just a
okay,
moment.
don't worry. Dr. Gosipina, I will run for you as the moderator. You can just give the voice.
I try again. Just a moment, but okay, yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay. Well,
This is
it's
visible?
yours. Okay.
Your presentation is visible?
Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Now I can
Okay.
see it. Okay. Thank you
So
so
you can
much.
start, please.
Well,
Yes.
yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for your presentation. And today I'm going to talk about a particular phenomenon about child abuse and violence against children includes all forms of violence against people under 18 years old, whether perpetrated by parents or other kinds of people, caregivers, peers, romantic partner, or strangers. Go on, please. Can I go on? Or,
Yes.
okay.
Just give me a second.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. You say next, okay? Yes.
Next. Thank you.
Okay. It is coming?
Yes, thank you so much. Well, the topics of my presentation, I'm going to talk to you about different classification of child abuse. We're talking about the risk factors and also the protective factors about this kind of phenomena. We are going to talk about the clinical aspect and also the evolutionary aspect of this global plague. And we're talking about the child abuse recognition and what we have to do about this important aspect. And I'm going to talk about the how can we do about prevent and contrast this phenomenon, and we have to talk about the child protection measure. Go on, please. If you want, Dr. Sabri, I can try again to share my my presentation.
I think I have moved, but the thing is, why it is not showing at your end, I don't know. So
okay, I try again.
I can see
just
the
a
scope
moment.
of. I can see this scope of problem.
Oh, okay. Just a moment. I try again.
Okay.
Okay. But I can do this because you are the organizer, and I can do this. I can do the share of the screen. I go on, no problem. Well, which is the scope of the problem? Child maltreatment is a global problem. How can I say? I try again. Oh, well, okay.
It is now. It is. You can try again.
Okay. Now we can see. Try again. Just a moment.
What you need to do is select the tab.
Okay.
Don't worry, I will do it for you. Don't worry. I will do it for you.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Let me do it for you, doctor. Please go ahead.
Okay. Now we can see.
Yes, I think.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Just we can go. Oh, okay. Well, child maltreatment is a global problem, a global plague, and is a complex phenomenon to study because there are different aspects that we can consider. We have different definition for to study and this phenomenon, and the type of child maltreatment are so different. We have also different coverage and the quality of official statistics, for example. And often we have also different coverage and quality of surveyed with self-reports from victims, parents, and also to caregivers. And another important aspect of this plague of this global problem is that every year there are an estimated 150 homicide deaths in children under 18 years of age, some of which are likely due to child maltreatment. And this is a global plague to must be combated. What about child abuse? Well, in literature we can find different kind of definition. To define the maltreatment of children, it is useful to refer to the definition of the World Health Organization, and shared that to the world, which includes this kind of means. Child maltreatment is the abuse and neglect of people under 18 years of age, and we can find different forms of maltreatment: physical, emotional treatment, sexual abuse, neglect, or negligent treatment, or commercial or exploitation that impact negativity in the life of the children. And then we can have 4 types of child maltreatment: physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological, that we have also 2 types of psychological abuse: emotional or mental, and also neglect. In according to literature, we also have a different conceptual definition, but all type of definition linked with these forms of means. Hear some noises. Okay. We can have different form of physical, emotional maltreatment, sexual abuse, neglect, with impact in important way of in the life of children. We can have form of exploitation that impact in actual or potential harm in the children health, and impact also in the development on in the dignity in the context of a relationship and in the responsibility, in the trust of power, and in the life of the children. Well, about when we talk about child abuse, we can talk about a form of prevalence of child maltreatment, but we talk about a particular form of forms of abuse. Well, in a particular case, we have 36% of children that are psychological abuse. In 23% in the case we have children physically abused. In the slide, we can see that 18% of girls are sexually abused, and 18% of boys are instead sexually abused. And at the end, in a 16% of children are instead neglected. These are the data of prevalence of this phenomenon in the global context. But what about the general criteria of the maltreatment? What does it mean? Well, we have different means about these terms. We can refer about active conduct, beatings, injuries, sexual act, over grooming, or also omissive conduct, for example, carelessness, neglect, abandonment. But an important thing is that the absence of physical traumatic evidence doesn't mean that we have not maltreatment. Maltreatment are then acts and deficiencies that seriously disturb children and boys and girls, obviously, and treating their bodily integrity, physically, emotionally, and also in impact intellectually and morally in their life. Another important things, maltreatment, we can define this term as an unforgettable childhood experience. Fatality in 2001 defined this concept about unforgettable childhood experiences as case in point, situation experiencing in childhood defined as negative accident, more or less chronic than that ideal evolutionary path for the child, on the plane both personal and relational. Introduce also a classification that differentiates direct violence from indirect violence. And obviously this kind of phenomenon is a phenomenon of abusive nature that if experienced early and repeatedly, especially in the primary care relationship, impact negatively, and especially if in situation with we have deficiency of absence of a protective and resiliency factor in the child. And this situation produce physically interpersonal trauma, for example. Well, I speak about the classification of Felitti. This author in 2001 introduced this kind of classification: direct violence and indirect violence. For direct violence, we means sexual abuse, physiological abuse, physical and also physical and emotional neglect. Instead, for indirect violence, we can means different forms of violence that we can find in the family context, in a particular situation, as alcoholism or drug addiction of parents, and also in psychiatric illness and different situation of violence, and also, for example, assisted violence. We can find this kind of different form of violence experienced in the context family. And obviously, these different situations, these different conditions that can lead to trauma in the context of childhood. Well, what about child abuse? We can have a different classification, and the classification are so important for the professional, but it's important to consider that often for the child, for the victims, we can have not only one form of abuse, but we have different form with the different various abuse, which therefore lead to a form of multiple victimization. And this is so important to consider for prevent, but also to contrast and to adopt different form to protect to cure the children. Well, according to the literature, we can find different forms of child abuse or maltreatment. We can have physical abuse, emotional and physiological abuse, sexual abuse, and obviously neglect. But when we talk about physical abuse, we talk about what? Well, we talk about a form of intentional form of abuse that use a physical violence against a child that can cause harm to the health, survival, and development or dignity of the child. We can find different form of this violence. We can have hit, beat, kick, shake, bite, strangle, scald. We can have burn, poison. We can use the perpetrator can use burn, poison, suffocate the victim, and often this kind of violence against children find realization in the family context, and is inflicted with the aim of punishment by the perpetrator versus of the children. Another important aspect to consider is that this kind of lesion can be affected by different organs and system, configuring different clinical picture. For example, we can have fractures, skin lesions, cranial concussion, and deep visual damages, and pose complex questions of differential diagnosis. And also we can have a particular form of physical abuse, for example, shaken baby syndromes, which is the violent shaking of the baby, usually under 24 months of age, that causes serious injuries in young children. The severity of the physical consequences is favored by the head proportionally larger than the rest of the body and by cerebral immaturity. And children lose consciousness in the immediacy of the event, described as syndrome by parents or guardians due to an alteration of cerebral perfusion of hypoxia ischemia type rather than as a consequence of diffuse external damage. And these both circumstances can cause death in the children, and this is several causes of physical abuse that can result in death of children, for example. Then we can have also physical abuse. Another form of child abuse is emotional and physiological abuse. This kind of violence is characterized by the repeated and continuous physiological pressure, emotional blackmail, form of indifference by perpetrator, form of denigration and devaluation. And this type of violence can damage or inhibit the development of cognitive emotional skill in the child and impact negatively in the intelligence, attention, perception, and also the development of the memory. This form of abuse fall into this category, then includes the failure of parent caregiver to provide a specific and appropriate and supportive environment. Well, another form of child abuse is the sexual abuse, and this kind of violence is a form of violence that involvement intentional and interpersonal form of violence that we can find by the perpetrator in a minor having forced of or developmentally inappropriate sexual experiences, and this kind of experiences may not involve graphic violence or injury, but they can occur also without physical contact, and this is a particular aspect that we have to consider when we visit or when we have an approach with the child, with the children. We can have different type of sexual abuse, this kind of violence depending on the type of relationship between the abuser and the child. We can have three different forms: intra-family, peri-family, and extra-family. Intra-family sexual abuse is implemented by members of the nuclear or extended family. Peri-family abuse is carried out by person known to the child, including, for example, those to whom he is entrusted for reason of care, of education, for example. The extra-family abuse, if when we have the abuser, for example, is a figure extraneous to the family environment and to the child. And sexual abuse is rarely a violent act that leaves physical marks, and medical evaluation is only an often non-decisive aspect of a complex diagnostic path that must necessarily be multidisciplinary. This is so important to consider in this particular phenomenon. And in fact, multidisciplinary assessment is so important. We have to consider sign analysis, physical, psychological, social, as well as stories and spontaneous statements of the alleged victim is so important. Well, we have also another aspect of sexual abuse. We have the sexual exploitation. In this type of violence, we have a form of behavior of the perceiver money or other benefits by different kind of individuals or criminal groups organized derived from sex tourism, child prostitution, child pornography, and another form of sexual exploitation is, for example, online abuse. We can have grooming, online sexual abuse, documented with video image and spread of the net, cybersex, setting, etc. Sexual exploitation is a particular type of sexual abuse, and we can have child pornography, that we have any representation by any means of a minor, of a child in a specific sexual activity, real or simulated, or any representation of the sexual organs of a minor for mainly sexual purpose. Child prostitution, for example, instead, we have when the child is forced to commit child abuse and maltreatment indication and recommendation and children maltreatment indication, sorry. And we have when the child sexual acts in exchange for money or other benefits. We can have also sex tourism. In this case, we have sex tourists, and this kind of perpetrators is defined as someone who, in order to practice sex with children, organize holiday or work, for example, holiday periods in countries that not only tolerate child prostitution, but often propagandize it to attract tourists and thus collect hard currency. Then we have online abuse, and this is so important, especially in this context, in this global context. Then we have the technology is so important in our world in this moment, and online abuse means any form of child sexual abuse perpetrated through the internet, and the documentation of images, videos, recordings of explicit sexual activity, real or simulated, for example, is no different for these kind of forms. And the forms of online sexual abuse against children includes offline sexual abuse. We can have groomings. We can have, for example, cybersex, in which the adult and the child perform sexual action exclusively via the web. We can have sexting, in which two or more children consensually produce and exchange sexually messages. This is the different form, for example, the actually sexual abuse. Then another form, okay. Another form of child abuse is neglect, and this is a form, a particular condition in which parents or person legally responsible for the child or the adolescent do not adequately provide for his physical needs, psychic and affective in relation to the developmental stage. We have serious carelessness, neglect. Serious neglect means any act of omission that resulting from a serious inability of the parents to provide for the child needs. We can have also inappropriates in the provision of care, a form of anachronism. We can have also cure in this form of child abuse, and this form of cure occurs when physical care is characterized by persistent and excessive medicalization by a parent, generally by the mother, for example, and the following four are distinguished. We can have medical shopping by proxy, and this is a condition in which one or both parents very concerned about the states of health of the child due to the most signs, symptoms, subject him to useless and excessive medical consultation. We can have also chemical abuse, substances or drugs that may be harmful are administered to the child by the parents on their own initiative in order to cause symptoms that attract the attention of health workers. Then we can have also Munchausen syndrome by proxy, when a parent, generally the mother, attributes to the child non-existent disease and the result of a distorted belief about his own health, then transferred to the child, who subsequently tends to collude with this attitude by simulating the symptoms of disease. And the diagnosis is often difficult and late. And also, here are is so important the multidisciplinary work of the healthcare, and not also of the healthcare, but all professional for the care of the child, of the children, for the correct diagnosis of the child abuse. Then we can have also other form of child abuse. We can have the witnessed violence. This form of violence against children means any form of maltreatment implemented through acts of violence, physical, verbal, physiological, sexual, and also economical, realized by parent of particular person in the family context, or other emotionally significant adults and children. Then we can have also human trafficking or labor trafficking. We can have this kind of violence when the children are forced to work for little or no pay, or domestic servitude, for example. Child trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery, and in this case, children are trafficked for purposes such case in point, domestic labor, armed groups, criminal activity, and even adoption, for example. This is another aspect of child abuse. Well, other form, we can have also bullying and cyberbullying. Bullying is an offensive and aggressive behavior that we have versus a single individual or several people that implement repeatedly over time different behavior versus the victim. This is a behavior, a form of behavior intentionally characterized by intentionally predetermination, repetitiveness, satisfaction, imbalance of power. Then we have also cyberbullying. This is a form of violence characterized by aggressive, intentional act conducted by an individual or also a group that use different form, also electronic contact, and these form of violence are repeated over time against one victim who cannot easily defend himself. This is a particular characteristic of cyberbullying. But what about the risk factor of a child, the child abuse. Well, risk factor about this phenomenon. To understand the child abuse phenomenon, we have to consider also risk factor, but also the other preventive factors, protective factors, sorry. Violence against children is a multifaceted problem which causes of the individual, close relationship, community and social levels. Important risk factors are related to individual related, society related, community related, and relationship related. Individual level, we are also instead different levels: society, community, relationship, and individual. At the individual level, we have biological and personal aspects such as sex and age, lower level and education, low income, having a disability or mental health problems, identifying as or being identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, harmful use of alcohol and drugs, and history exposure to violence, for example. In the close relationship level, we have lack of emotional bonding between children and parents and caregiver. We have poor parenting practices. In the community level, we can have poverty in high population density, for example. These are aspects to consider here, because before I said I underlined the importance of the multidisciplinary aspect in the diagnosis of the child abuse. In the society level, we can have social and gender norms that create a climate in which violence is normalized. For example, we can have health, economic, educational, and social policies that maintain economic, gender and social inequalities. We can have many aspects to consider. It is a complex phenomenon to consider, very, very complex. Well, what about the risk factor? Well, we have different factors, risk factor to consider. We can have different percentage, externalized behavior problems, intellectual disability, and this kind are linked with the individual risk factor. We can have rates of violence or immigration, for example, and these are correlated with the community aspect. We can have low self-esteem, employed for unwanted pregnancy, poor impulse control, mental neurological disorder, etc. We have different factors correlated with child abuse. And another important aspect to consider is that the government strategies are essential to combat the phenomenon. We cannot to fight this phenomenon if we cannot pay attention to the right. This right to consider are the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to social security, the right to education, and the right to equality and freedom from discrimination. These rights are so important, and these represent an important aspect to prevent the child abuse. This is also, there are also the protective factor, and this is factors important to consider to avoid child abuse. Stable attachment of the children to the adult family members, high levels of attention from the father during childhood, not being close to peers who commit crimes or abuse substances. This is important to consider a social context near the family of the the context near close to the child, to the children, a warm and supportive relationship with an offensive parent. It's so important to consider the absence of stress deriving from abuse suffered, and also to live in a community with strong social cohesion. This is so important. Obviously, to have a stable family unit. Child abuse and consequences of this global plague. We can have a problem related to language skill and verbal, quindi problems developing intergenerational transmission of violence, also post-traumatic stress disorder, different forms of long-term maladaptation to the different context. We can have also formal different kind of depression. We can have also cognitive and behavioral difficulties. We can have also form of bullying and delinquency, and different kind of relationship distortion. But it's so important to consider that child abuse as social and health cost. This kind of violence impact negatively in the society, and it has a massive impact not only in the social context, also in the national context and the level, economic level. It's so important to consider. What about the consequence of this kind of violence? Well, about the health problems, we can find poor daily functioning, mental and neurological disorder. We can have for example, excessive health services use. In the social and behavioral problems, we can have attachment problems. We can have poor self-regulation or low self-esteem. Instead, we can also have subsequent violent victimization, for example. In the context of the impaired cognitive and academic performance, we have cognitive impairment, poor academic performance, poor languages functioning. In the side of the economic problem, we can have instead work absenteeism, lower socioeconomic status, gambling. This is another form of addiction, for example, can cause addiction, and employment. This is so important, that impacts negativity in the social context and also in the national context. What about the clinical and evolutionary aspect? Well, this kind of abuse is a form of a violence that developing personality of a child, causing many causes and consequences in the short term, but also a medium and long term in the growth process, especially in cases where experience takes on a traumatic character. The onset of discomfort or a real disturbance starting from a condition of abuse or serious neglect is interpreted as the outcome of a complex process linked to the balance between protective factor and risk factor. This is so important to consider. This is so important. These aspects are so important to consider. And also, again, physiological and biochemical system of child can be impaired, leading to poor resilience and greater tendency to collapse in the case of subsequent stressful situation. This is the principles of multi-causality. Then can cause severe impact, massive impact of the clinical and evolutionary aspect of the lifelong child, in the lifelong anche health of the children. And this is important also for the equifinality system, and there are different paths that leads of the same result. There are different combination of risk factors that can lead of the same kind of element. What can we have? What kind of consequence we can find about child abuse? Well, the abuse remains undetected and undetected. The mistreatment is repeated over time and carried out with violence and coercion. These are the major causes, as with more. We can have the protective response to the victim and his family or social context in delayed. We can have traumatic experience that remains unexpressed or unprocessed, for example. The physical or physiological and sexual dependence between the victim and the abuser is low, and the bond between the victim and the abuser is of a family nature. And the stage of development and the risk factor present in the victim favor an evolution negative is so important to consider. We have also the different kind of perpetrators. The perpetrator can be parents and other family members, caregivers, friends, strangers, other children, healthcare workers, for example, acquaintances, other authority and employers. What about the prevention and contrast strategies? Well, these are so important. The evidence, there are evidence that and also the scientific literature to state with full confidence that child maltreatment can be prevented. And the World Health Organization also state that preventing violence requires an interdisciplinary system approach that develop action aimed at preventing the occurrence of violence against children with a different approach: primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention, and enhancement of factor protection rather than the risk reduction. This is so important, for example. And health promotion is the process that allows people to increase control of themselves and improve their health, and the promotion of well-being represent a first level for a global intervention with a high preventive value. And this is what World Health Organization underlined to do, for example. There are 7 strategies for ending violence against children. This is more important to prevent and contrast this kind of phenomenon. Implementation and enforcement of law is so important. We can have, for example, action finalized to banning violent, discipline, restricting access to alcohol and firearms. We can have norm and values change, for example, altering norms that condone the sexual abuse of girls or aggressive behavior among boys. What about safe environments? We can have behaviors such as identifying neighborhood or spots for violence and then addressing the local causes through problem-oriented policy and other intervention. Parental and caregiver support. Well, we can have providing parents training to young first-time parents, for example, income economic straightening. In this case, we can have particular acts such as microfinance and gender equity training. We can have also activity finalized to response services providing, and also education and life skill, such as ensuring that children attend school and providing life and social skill training. Again, what about the child to protect the child? What about the protection measure to protect child? Well, World Health Organization say that are more important this kind of action: monitoring the global magnitude and characteristics of violence against children, maintaining an electronic information system, developing and disseminating evidence-based technical guidance documents, regular publishing global status reports, supporting countries and partners in implementing evidence-based prevention and response strategies, and so important, collaborating with international agencies and organizations to reduce this global plague for eliminating this kind of violence. As I said, it's so important the multidisciplinary approach. It is also important to adopt a behavior aimed at protecting the child in case of suspected abuse, have a suspicious attitude, and investigate where we think there may be a probable condition of abuse, correctly collect all the evidence and collect the elements useful for the construction of the case, have a deep respect for the dignity of people in generally and especially for the child. This is the important aspect to consider by the multidisciplinary professional. We can have different situations. We can have emergency intervention and programmable intervention, but the important aspect is the multidisciplinary approach. At the end, every role is crucial in prevention. This consideration of Frederick Rogers, in my opinion, is so important. We live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say it's not my child, not my community, not my war, not my problem. Then there are those we see the need and respond. I consider those people my heroes. Thank you so much for the attention.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Agostipina, for this nice lecture on the child abuse criminology, and very informative.